Okay, welcome back. This is Chapter 11. Chapter 11 is all about the multimedia stuff and interactivity. And let me tell you, this used to be the most difficult part of programming, just because of the absolute hell they put you through on making sure that your video, your audio worked in every single browser. So, HTML5 basically came into existence because of this problem. All right. So let's go to the learning objectives and we'll figure out what it is we're supposed to learn. So, describe the purpose of plugins. And they go by different names, helpers and containers and all these things. Describe the types of multimedia files that you'd expect to find on the web. That's cool. Configure hyperlinks to be able to serve those files. All right. Configure audio and video. Yep. Describe the features of Flash and JavaScript and Java and Ajax. We're not actually going to do those. We're just going to talk about them. Configure Flash animation for a page. Configure a Java application. Well, we'll pretend. Create interactive image gallery. Ooh, that's pretty cool. Configure the CSS transform and transition properties. Those are pretty cool. And describe the purpose of all this brand new stuff from HTML5. Okay, so in the beginning, you had Flash content and you had Java content and JavaScript and all these other kinds of technologies that were used in web pages to provide them more oomph. Because otherwise, you just went to a website and all it was a bunch of static stuff. I mean, there was nothing moving around. There was no cool little containers that slipped up and down like you have in Facebook. I mean, it was kind of boring. And so out of desperation, people came up with all these really, really cool things they could use. Now, eventually, like I mentioned before, the HTML5 folks came out and said, we're going to put this all in the standard so you don't have to use all these plugins. Okay, so we'll start this discussion on page 474 about what the heck a plugin is. Well, as it says here, there's three different things here. There's a plugin, a thing called a container, and a thing called codecs. So let's just start at the beginning. So a plugin. A plugin is a piece of software that runs on your machine that is somehow linked to your browser. So your browser's over here talking to the web, and then your browser says, hang on a second, I've received content that I don't know how to use. So therefore, I'm going to go over here and run this application. So for example, a very common one would be like the Adobe Acrobat Reader. So if you have the reader installed on your machine, plus you have like Internet Explorer installed on your machine, when you go to a website that serves PDF pages, your browser basically says, well, I don't know how to deal with a PDF, but I know somebody who does. Because we got this thing over here called an Adobe Reader. So whenever I see a PDF, I'm just going to just pass it off to this guy. It made it simple. And so that way browsers didn't have to stay all that current with all the umpteen gazillion things going out there, as long as they provided plugins. So there's a problem though. Opening up my browser to somebody else's code is inherently dangerous. Because what happens if the people who produce this plugin are not all that diligent, and maybe, I'm not going to say they're unscrupulous and trying to trick you, but there are people out there that would try to install something on your browser which is malicious. But even if it wasn't the case, if you have a piece of code that's inherently unsafe, then installing a plugin onto my browser makes my browser just as safe as that thing. And so if I was very proud of my browser being really, really rock solid, it's like having a screen door in a submarine, because if you allow for plugins, then whatever the security is of the plugin, that has now invaded your system. So a lot of people don't like plugins anymore. In fact, plugins on modern browsers are practically unheard of. Okay, so for example, Flash. Flash has been around for quite some time. It's a fantastic. It does a great job of animating things on the screen. It's really pretty doggone cool stuff. But Flash was a little buggy, and had been buggy for quite some time, and there were just too many security issues. So whenever I would put a Flash plugin in my browser, that just meant that I was opening myself up to everything. So modern browsers either A, don't allow a Flash plugin, or they have their own version of Flash built into the browser. In other words, the browser doesn't have to go off and run something to run Flash. It's built in. So for example, Microsoft Edge is one of those where the Flash is actually built into the operating system, and so you don't go to, Adobe and get a new version of Flash because Microsoft is the one that's providing you the new version of Flash. So yes, having it under your control is a heck of a lot better than having it under somebody else's control. Okay. Shockwave. Shockwave is the company who actually put the thing together. It used to be Shockwave Flash. Adobe bought them out, but it's still, sometimes you'll see SWF and Shockwave content, and there's lots of other things. Adobe Acrobat Reader, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Java. Java is a programming language, and it used to be that you could go in and create what's called a little applet, and your machine would pull down this applet and run the application inside your browser. Now, once again, if you're a security person, you're probably going, say that again? What? You mean I'm pulling something off the internet and it's going to run the application off of a file it found on the internet? No. So Java is fallen out of favor big time. Almost all in fact, I think the only browser that currently supports Java is Firefox. Chrome, Internet Explorer. I'm sorry, Internet Explorer and Firefox. But Chrome and all the rest of the heavyweights, they've dropped support for Java. Okay. Windows Media Player. If you're on a Windows machine, you could have a little plug-in into your browser so that if it ran across something it doesn't know, like an audio file, it'll just pop open the Windows Media Player. That's pretty cool. And QuickTime. Used to be that you'd get an awful lot of videos in QuickTime format, and those were easy to, again, it would launch the QuickTime application on your machine. Okay, so those are all plugins. Okay, but let's go through it one more time. Let's talk about Microsoft Edge. It's a new, relatively new among all of the browsers. It's probably the youngest, if that's the right term, the youngest of the browsers, and it does not have support for media plugins. Okay, it supports Flash, but its own built-in version of Flash. It does not support Java at all. And basically all it uses is HTML5. This is the way it's supposed to work. If you want to do an audio or video, you're going to use the HTML5 constructs to be able to pull that off. You're not going to be using plugins to do it. Okay. Which brings us to the thing about codecs. I didn't actually mention media containers, but when we get to like video and audio, we'll explain what that means. So what the heck is a codec? That sounds like something from one of those goofy, don't remember the name of the movies. But anyway, so you think, okay, well, the war is over. We won. HTML5 has provided an opportunity for us to do audio and video without having plugins. Yay! No. The war now is what codec is your browser capable of supporting. And a codec basically is the encoding scheme. So I take a live video and I compress it down and store it into a particular file format. Let's say in this particular case, I store my videos in MP4 file format. Now, does your machine understand MP4? If it does, if it understands the encoding scheme, then you'll be able to see this video. If you don't have that support, well then it'll be some other type of video thing. So the war is not really over. Now it's just a matter of, okay, I can do audio files and video files, but what encryption or what encoding, what compression routine was used to produce that thing? And so that's where we are now. And then there's a whole section in the book talking about the reason how we got here. It all has to do with copyrights and royalties. I'm very proud of my MP4 encoding scheme or my whatever. And so I want to charge money for the people who produce this stuff. Now there's an entire open source out there. Basically every file format you've ever heard of that's proprietary, there's probably another one that's just as good that's open source. And so again, most web browsers will support all of those things. You can go to a website and look at, what codecs do I see. What I think is really cool, when you buy a phone, when you look at the specifications for your phone, you buy a brand new, Android device, on the specification sheet, it says, here are the audio file formats that we support. And it lists them. And here's the video file formats that we support. Wouldn't it be nice if, the browsers did the exact same thing? Here's a list of things that we natively support. Yeah, well, darn it, they don't do that. Okay. So, let's talk about, let's give some examples here. So, these are our file format extensions. You know what I'm talking about, a file extension like WAV, WAV. So, this is the extension. Now, oddly enough, they call this thing a container. And the reason is, let's say, let's use this one. MP4. I tell you, let's just start at the beginning. Wave. Okay. So, it's a container because this file format does not tell me how it's encoded. Alright? The file format tells me what it is. Okay, this is an audio file. But you have to open up the audio file. And your application needs to read inside of it to figure out what the actual encoding is. Which means I could have 2 WAV files on my machine, one of which will work and one of which will not work because I have this codec, but I don't have the other codec. Got it? Does that sound like remotely like how a test question might be worded? Okay. So the extension does not tell you how it's encoded. It basically tells you what the file is. That's what that word container means. Not all of these are containers. This is the open source thing I was telling you about, where they have open source file formats and little readers and all these codecs that are completely free. Okay. So for example, this is the one supported by QuickTime's, iTunes, and mobile devices. Yay! So M4A for audio. It's basically MPEG for audio. Okay. So you understand the difference between an extension, container, and a codec. If not, read the book. Go through this section one more time. Anyway, this is the one for audio. Let's look at the one for video. It's about the same. So we have all these video formats. AVI. This is an excellent one to talk about a container. It's a video file, but how's it encoded? We don't know. Windows Media Encoding, MPEG, of course. Web. This is a new one. This was designed specifically for doing some really cool stuff. Google put this one together. It's actually pretty good. I don't see that many browsers using it, but it's actually pretty doggone cool. So MP4 is what I encode out for like these videos. I encode them in there and I send them up to YouTube. Now let me explain what YouTube does, because this is kind of confusing. I submit a single file format. I submit just an MP4 up to YouTube. And then YouTube takes that and says, there's an awful lot of people that can't use an MP4. So it builds me like 4 different versions of this file. This thing that you're watching right now is one of 4 different files that got created by YouTube. I didn't have to do it. YouTube did it. It created one with this encoding and with that encoding and this encoding, so that no matter what device you're going to, one of those is bound to work. Okay, so this is a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark. We'll pick this thing up again in just a few.